Okay, take two of the live stream. The last live stream was by a load of people setting up fake profiles and giving a load of abuse. So let's have a quick start again. Right. So Ancelotti is now Everton manager. He has signed a big contract with Everton that worth of about 11.5 million a year. It's going to be interesting to see what Everton do in the transfer market with Ancelotti be given that big, expensive contract as a manager. Mikel Arteta is now the new Arsenal manager, taking over from Freddie Ljungberg. There is rumours of massive dressing room discontent at Arsenal. Now, Mikel Arteta used to be a player at Arsenal. He's obviously been assistant manager to Pep Guardiola at Man City and has been there for a few years now as an assistant to Pep Guardiola. So he's obviously learning from one of the best. So it's a risky appointment with Mikel Arteta because of his lack of managerial experience. But we've seen with Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard how well they've done in management since they've been given their first couple of managerial appointments. So there seems to be a trend for going for these new fresh-faced managers as giving them a chance and giving them a go in the Premier League and the Scottish Premiership and the Championship, and actually giving them some experience. Arsenal are going to also have to make some moves in the transfer window. They might have to offload some players. There are rumours of players wanting out and handing in transfer requests and an unsettled dressing room. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what occurs there and how Arsenal sort of shape this squad to try and get back into winning form and winning games and having some kind of structure. On the Everton side of things, they are in a relegation battle. That's why I'm surprised Ancelotti has actually gone there. He normally goes to a team that already has a strong base to build off, which has success and continues that success or attempts to continue that success. So I'm very surprised that Ancelotti has taken the step to go to Everton. But he's saying all the right things. He has got a track record of winning trophies. But I think the job at Everton is going to be a lot tougher than Ancelotti, I think, realises. Now, he does know the English game. He has coached, obviously, at Chelsea. He speaks multitude of languages. I think they're going to be very busy in the transfer market as well over the next this window. I expect a lot of them to get the business done early as well. I expect the first week or so of the transfer market to be really busy on the transfer dealings of Everton. Maybe they sell some players first to bring players in. That could be really, really interesting what they do. But they need to sort out that defence, and they need to have a couple of midfielders added to that squad. Same with Arsenal as well. They both are looking for defenders and midfielders. In reality, they're looking to strengthen and build from the back forward. It's going to be interesting to see what both those clubs do, considering that their biggest rivals are so far ahead of them in development and growth and going forward and being better. The title race, Liverpool are in command of this title race. They have a nice comfortable lead, but fixture congestion. This is what's been brought up a lot with Liverpool having to play so many extra games over Leicester, for example, in second. Fixture congestion. That's going to be really interesting to see how that affects Liverpool over the Christmas period and into the new year. Leicester don't have European football. They're focusing on the league and the FA Cup. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that does actually affect both Liverpool and Leicester as the top two at least going forward. Man City obviously have cup fixtures as well. Chelsea, they have these cup fixtures. Man United, obviously just the FA Cup, but they're so much further back. That's the top five. It's going to be really interesting to see how the fixture congestion affects Liverpool this season like it did last season, because last season I think that's one of the reasons why they were chased down by Man City and overtaken by Man City. Even though Liverpool won the Champions League, I think that was a big reason why that took place, was that fixture congestion. How they deal with it this time around is going to be interesting. They played the World Cup Challenge, they played the Super Cup, they've the Charity Shield, they've won all these trophies, whatever it is, the Super Cup, the Champions League, and the World Club Challenge. But those are extra games that they would rather do without. And this is something that UEFA and FIFA and the FA have to look at is fixture congestion, not just for Premier League clubs, but also for the Championship and then the lower league clubs that play in the FA Trophy as well, and things like that. They have to look at what's going on here. And then you look across the channel in France, they're scrapping after next season their version of the League Cup, because the cup competitions themselves have been devalued because of the lack of the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup being gone now for 20 years. That has devalued the domestic cup competitions, and the French are now scrapping their version of the League Cup, which is a massive loss because that's a historical tournament, a cup competition in European football in the French league, and that's gone by the wayside. You could look at other sports scrapping domestic cup competitions or domestic, one-off games like the City Countries Origin series in the NRL being scrapped a couple of years ago. I think that was a mistake. I think that was a great way to grow the game in rural areas in Australia, in New South Wales, and possibly they could have done it to Queensland as well. And that is a big loss to the game. There's talk about also getting rid of replays in the FA Cup entirely. They've restructured the League Cup to a certain extent, and the FA Trophy for the lower leagues, with the youth teams being able to play. I think, yes, fixture congestion is a big issue, and it has remained a big issue for many years, and managers regularly discuss it, and it is regularly discussed by experts of the sport, going fixture congestion is an issue, player welfare is an issue. We're seeing other sports taking player welfare more seriously by limiting the number of games a player can play. So it's going to be interesting to see what Everton and Arsenal do in the transfer window with new managers, and it's going to be interesting to see if Liverpool can maintain this winning momentum that they have, and maintain their gap at the top, which they couldn't do last season. And this was the period of the season where they basically threw away their lead to Man City. Now Leicester are in a similar position where they're chasing them down. They have a target to chase for, and they have less games to play. This is the very, very interesting thing. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be very, very interesting going forward to see what happens. And also if Leicester decide to make a few additions to their squad, because they're in a very strong position. And they're on a record-breaking run themselves for the club. And Liverpool are on a record-breaking run for their club. Even though the history of the two clubs, this is something really interesting. Leicester are actually on better form now than when they won the Premier League 3 seasons ago. Liverpool are also on better form now than last year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that fixture congestion affects not these clubs, but all the clubs chasing for the trophies domestically. Man City, have they shot their bolt? Have they got the team balanced right? That's interesting. And losing Mikel Arteta as an assistant to Guardiola, how will that affect things on the touchline? How will that affect training? How will that affect these things? Have to be thought about when you lose an assistant from your coaching setup. That does actually affect how you will coach on the training field, and how you will adapt your tactics. Because having that secondary voice of a player recently retired, who's also played for the club in that dressing room, is a big thing. So that's going to be interesting. In the ice hockey news, in the NHL, Arizona obviously acquiring Taylor Hall in a trade for 3 prospects and 2 conditional draft picks. Really interesting trade. Didn't have to give up a lot to actually get him in. They didn't have to give up any of their roster pieces right now. They have a lot of draft picks anyway, and a lot of youth development going really well in Arizona. The whole Liam Kirk getting drafted as well. Last year in the NHL draft, big news, made ice hockey more popular over in the UK. Well, it was building on that popularity, the GB side doing really well as well. The Taylor Hall acquisition, really interesting. They've got Phil Kessel there. They've got 2-time Stanley Cup winner. They've got Rick Tocchet behind the bench as coach. They have a certain style of play, which is defensively based, very tight game, very controlled game. Taylor Hall has only made the playoffs once as a player. Didn't work out at Edmonton. Hasn't really worked out at the Devils either, and now he's going on to Arizona. But Arizona are a team in a strong position. They're top of their division in the NHL, at the top of the Pacific. They're doing really well in the conference as well. If the playoffs were to start tomorrow, they would be seeded number 1 in the Pacific. They would have an easier route to get through with home ice advantage through to the late stages of the playoffs. Biggest trade of the season so far. So really interested to see what's going to happen with this, and how Arizona adapt getting Taylor Hall into their lineup. And also the Devils. I mean, Shapiro has said that, or Shiro has said that this is not a fire sale. We're not going to, sell off all our assets. But Wayne Simmons, UFA, PK Subban, not really fitting in there. It's not working at all. Players underperforming. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Devils, but they've really struggled for years now, and part of that is to do with management off the ice and how the organisation is run. Okay, I'm not surprised Chelsea and Spurs it's kicking off, but it's a sad indictment of English football right now that hooligan elements are making the headlines rather than the players on the pitch. Making tackles, scoring goals, goalkeepers pulling off saves. Epic end-to-end games, open football. It's more talking about the misbehaviour in the stands from fans, and unfortunately, that is a massive, massive shame that the game is being overshadowed. On the Watford Man United. Hey, they've also made a manager change as well. They've sacked the manager and replaced the manager. But Man United, I mean, they had a resurgence in form for a little bit, but there's clearly issues with Pogba. There are clearly issues within that dressing room and the way the club is run. Ed Woodward and the Glazers, the fans aren't happy. There's discontent. But this is a problem you have when a team has been so successful and so consistent for so long. When they do have that first wobbly season, can they bounce back? And the answer was no. They've declined the last few seasons. I mean, towards the end of Alex Ferguson's time in charge, they were showing cracks that good coaching covered up. Is Solskjaer the right guy to take, to be in charge? I mean, his record at Molde was decent. It's Norwegian football, and people go, it's only the Norwegian league. But he managed to turn a club around at Molde that hadn't won for decades into the top team in Norway when he was there. His time at Cardiff City didn't go well, but when he was interim, the players played for him. Now I think there are issues with that club, with transfer policy, with youth policy, with the direction the team is going, with the way they're overpaying players' wages. Some bad contracts there. But this is the problem with football, or soccer as you would call it. There's no salary cap. There's no control of cost. Whereas in things like the NHL, a bad contract really can weigh down a team when they want to build pieces and move pieces. With the NRL, again, a bad contract can really weigh down a team when it comes to salary cap, getting players in and filling out a squad to compete. Watford, I still think they're going to be in a relegation fight, but that 2-0 will give them some confidence. Bearing in mind last season they were in the FA Cup final, so they've really tailed off. But a lot of teams are really underperforming this season. All the clubs that have sacked their managers are below where they were last season at this stage. I do say this: if you regularly change the managers, Watford go through managers quicker than Chelsea do. Watford do have a high managerial turnover. That says to me that they're built to win now. So that FA Cup final defeat, if they won that FA Cup final, things could have been different. But they regularly go through managers far too often. It's like a revolving cycle. It's like a conveyor belt, and that does actually affect how the team play. That does actually affect how the game is played, the team, the tactics, the philosophy. They have some good players at Watford as well. I do think that something's not right there, but they've got that 2-0 win, confidence. That can go a long way. You mentioned the basketball streaming, obviously on YouTube. Minor sports are doing this a lot. Sports that are trying to grow in new markets are doing this a lot. I've noticed this. Major League Baseball, a massive sport in the US, obviously wanted to grow the game out into Europe. This season just gone, they had an agreement with YouTube where they were posting games live. You could watch games live on the Major League Baseball page and channel, and you could watch games live. NASCAR are starting to do that. Major League Rugby are starting to do that. The Australian Ice Hockey League is doing it. English basketball doing it, or British basketball doing it. That's saying to me that some of these minority sports in countries, or sports which are wanting to grow into new markets, are not necessarily trusting the media outlets to give them the exposure they want. And it says there's a shift in how we perceive and how we absorb our sport, and there's a shift in the media rights. I can definitely see a massive shift when the next media rights are up for negotiation here in the UK or in Australia or in the US or Canada or Europe or South America, wherever the media rights are up for negotiation between the leagues and the sports and the media companies. We're seeing a shift. We've noticed that some sports are getting more free-to-air coverage than others than they were before. Other sports have signed new media deals, which involve online and streaming services. We're seeing Amazon now getting involved more and more with tennis and football. Not that the deals are very, very good, mind. You don't actually get as much as you think for what you're paying for. Well, we'll see what happens. But what I have noticed, the amount of people who illegally stream sport, there's some boxing pay-per-views where more people actually illegally stream for free or for a fraction of the price than what the pay-per-view was last year. That says to me that there has to be a change in the economic dynamic and the economic business model that they have. pay-per-view for boxing is madness, especially when ITV, a national free-to-air broadcaster in this country, where all the ITV channels are on free-to-air, come up with an ITV box office. When you're paying for subscription sport to have another subscription to get the pay-per-view, that is a flawed business model. And the Hearn family are part of the problem with this, constantly pay-per-view after pay-per-view after pay-per-view on a regular basis. It used to be a special thing to have that boxing pay-per-view, like once every 6 months, once a year. Now it's once a month, once every 2 weeks. There's a pay-per-view of some kind of boxing promotion or MMA promotion, and it's a bit overkill. They've oversaturated the market, and that's a problem. And people aren't willing to pay it. People's incomes aren't big enough to pay for these things. The average wage is stagnated for the average working man and woman, average working family, whereas sports stars, their salaries have gone through the roof. They've exploded. There's, the amount of money that has gone into sport, whereas other areas of the global economy have really struggled in certain countries and certain areas, is surprising how sport hasn't been affected as much. The interesting thing is British basketball had its funding cut by the British Olympic Association and Team GB, how the money is pulled together for the Olympic funding after 2012. So the Olympic legacy that we're talking about in every Olympics, the Olympic legacy for this country or these sports, post 2012 Olympics, the basketball budget was pretty much scrapped from the British Olympic budget and the British UK athletics. All these kind of things like the athletics, the swimming, the bobsleigh, the winter sports, basketball had its funding taken away, partly because. And so this is an interesting thing. There are a lot of basketball courts up. I'm a bin man, so on my job, I go collecting all people's refuse and stuff, and I see a lot of families have basketball hoops up on their driveway or in their garden. So kids are playing it. People are, playing basketball as a hobby. It is played, but it's a minority sport. The fact that British basketball is deciding to go through YouTube to stream live games says to me they're not happy with the media coverage they're getting, or they couldn't get a decent media deal, even for a local radio station or a local website to stream it. They're not happy with the media coverage they're getting, and that is a fair criticism. I don't think they are getting enough media coverage. At the same time, we've got a few British-born players playing in the NBA. There's a handful, but basketball isn't as big here as it is in other parts of Europe, and that's partly to do with the Cold War and the sports rivalry between East and West, between Eastern Europe and Western Europe and North America when it came to the Olympics. The former Soviet bloc countries, Yugoslavia especially, the former Yugoslavia, vast parts of Eastern Europe, basketball is a lot bigger. It's also a lot bigger in certain parts of Western Europe as well, with the multi-sport clubs that they have. Whereas over here you have the individual rugby club, tennis club, cricket club, football club. In Europe, they're all under one umbrella for an athletics association. They have the local club, which covers everything. I mean, PSG used to have a rugby league club and a football club owned by the same people. So there is this, I think it's a sports culture thing. And so you have to also change a sports culture from the grassroots. You have to put grassroots funding in for sport to grow. And what we're seeing with basketball in this country is, kids are clearly playing it. Adults are playing it. People are playing it. People are wanting to watch it because the NBA has got a TV deal here. But at the same time, there's not the facilities in place structured in the schoolyards, at the sports centres, where there's actually structured basketball courts outside or inside necessarily. So there's got to be a grassroots thing. You have to put the investment in at grassroots to get enough playing talent, people playing, to then warrant growing the sport. Yes, it's great that they're streaming live on YouTube and they're trying to really get the growth out there, but it also needs grassroots investment, and that doesn't mean local and national government putting money into sports facilities, not just basketball, but a whole range of sports. They need to put the grassroots facilities in place so that kids and young adults and families can play and watch. Without the grassroots, you're not going to get it. Thank you. I mean, I like rugby league and rugby union. I used to obviously play at school and for my local rugby club. Big league fan myself. Big Union and League fan. Yes, this is my Arizona hoodie, and I'm wearing this because of the Taylor Hall trade earlier this week. Massive trade in the sense that Arizona didn't have to give up many pieces to get him in. They gave up 3 prospects who weren't necessarily part of their future plans necessarily. They weren't necessarily developing at a rate they wanted, and 2 conditional draft picks that may change simply because draft picks get traded a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if the New Jersey Devils make some more trades before the trade deadline. We now have the NHL roster freeze, which means no players can be traded for like the next 9 days, I believe, or 8 days. So no trades can take place. Now, GMs can talk to each other about the possibility of trades and things like that, but no actual trades can take place because of the Christmas period, which I think a lot of sports could learn from, is putting roster or transfer freezes in place at this time of year. We can discuss the January transfer window in football on another video entirely. The Coyotes, yes. I mean, I'm a Jets fan, so when the Jets moved in '96, it was a shame. I was a big fan of Teemu Selanne and Dale Hawerchuk, idols of mine when I was a kid, watching on the old ESPN over here in the UK. The issue with the Arizona Coyotes is their arena in Glendale, the Gila River Arena. They need to be back in Phoenix. It's too far from the center of Phoenix. Commute time, 45 minutes to an hour and a half, so depending on the route you take. But the crowds are up. Attendance is up. They're not the lowest attendance in the league anymore. They've got Chaker as a good GM. They've got stability, got a new owner. They are staying in Arizona. So for all these fans from the Toronto area and Ontario saying this team should be moved, this team should be moved, this team should be moved, the fact that they're saying this is because Toronto have been so bad for so long and they keep supporting crap. And that's why the team's been bad, is because the ownership, we're still making money out of crap. We can do what we want. I think, union with Major League Rugby has done a real good thing there in the US. The US national side has massively improved. They're more competitive. Canada have done not so well in the last decade or so. They've declined. USA have gone up. Uruguay have gone up. I think Major League Rugby has been great. The games that I've seen on the internet, I've watched most of last season. This season's just gone. Watched most of the games. There was, I think, 3 games that I couldn't watch because of work. Massive fan of the quality that was on show, and getting players like Matthew Bastareaud and Ben Foden to play in Major League Rugby is a big thing. That's a big statement when you've got international tier 1 level nation players who could still play international rugby now if they were eligible for selection, willing to leave European rugby and the money in European rugby to go and play for a lot less cash, by the way. Yes, it's a marquee signing, but they're not going to get paid as anywhere near as much as what they would have been had they stayed in Europe to finish out their careers. That is a big statement of intent. Now, Matthew Bastareaud is a divisive figure in rugby because of his size and his style of play. But at the same time, he's been France captain and vice captain. He's an interesting player because he's so out of position. Basically, he's built like a prop, but he plays outside centre. He's a wrecking ball. He's a very physical player, but that is a big name in rugby union. Ben Foden, ex-England fullback, again, big name in rugby union. Technically, if you look at these 2 players, they could still play for England and France. On any given day, I would still have them in and around an international selection. If I was selecting a starting 15 and a 23-man squad to play a game against a one-off game, I would still actually put them in the frame for being up for international selection. They've still got enough fitness and rugby nous about them to play at international level. That is a big, big, big thing for Major League Rugby to get those players. Big thing. I think, they're getting it right. I think Major League Rugby is getting it right, whereas other sports like Major League Soccer didn't get it right in the beginning. The first decade of Major League Soccer was a decade of empty stadiums and losing money and teams going out of business and relocating, where I think Major League Rugby has actually definitely got it right. Rugby league in the US is a semi-pro league on the East Coast. That's what I know of. And of course, you've got the Wolfpack, and there are plans to put a team in the New York area at some point through the Super League structure. That will be really interesting to see if that comes about, because I think the US they still qualify for the World Cup, but most of their players are expats and have tenuous links to the United States. A lot of them are American Samoans that have got links to Australia as well. So they need to develop homegrown talent. That is a massive must. But rugby league selection rules for international level are a laughing stock, and I've discussed that on a multitude of videos over the last 2 years. That the selection policies for rugby league internationally are an absolute joke. You can play for more than one nation in your career. Just look at the Fafita brothers, Jared Hayne. I could list Valentine Holmes. I could list up a whole load of players who played for a multitude of nations at rugby league level. It's a farce. Whereas rugby union, they're a bit more strict on the selection rules. But no, it's interesting that you're saying NFL is terrible. It's really interesting. Now, I like the Arizona Cardinals and the Green Bay Packers. I'm not a massive NFL fan. I will admit I have started to go off the sport in the last couple of years. They've got Major League Rugby has to market itself correctly. I think they've chosen the right locations to play the game. I think they've chosen the right size stadiums to play the games in as well. That is crucial. The size of the stadium, you want to pack that stadium out, even if it's only a couple of thousand people. You want to pack it out. So when it does get shown on TV or when it does get shown on YouTube, you look like you filled it out. You set it. You're at capacity. People want to. I want to get a ticket. It drives interest. Empty seats doesn't drive interest. Full seats. Full stadiums actually drives interest. I do agree the NFL has got issues. Now, it'd be interesting to see why you think the NFL is terrible. For me, I've started to go off it more and more. The more scandal involved with the NFL, there's so much scandal that you have to look at the amount of individual players who have legal troubles and then other things that are going on with the NFL. The CTE lawsuit in itself, I think the NHL and the NFL and other contact sports need to look at not just CTE, but player welfare as a whole, because some players are retiring from these sports in their early 20s. Really. The NFL at the moment, there's a lot of issues with the NFL. Same with the CFL in Canada. I think the London series has now become a cash grab rather than a one-off event. It's now become 4 games every year, every season. Will they move a team to London? Will it work? I have my concerns about if they put a team in London. Again, on player welfare, the jet lag and the TV audience. What time would the games be played? Because it's lots of things with the NFL that I'm not keen on. I've done a lot of videos on the NFL. The amount of players that have legal troubles and scandal, and the amount of scandal behind the scenes, it's concerning, to say the least. It'll be interesting, though, to see why you think the NFL is terrible. And that is a really interesting question to you, the viewer, the US Rugby League fan, because, you are... Oh, who's this? I've got a phone call to answer. Hang on a second. Hello? Yes. Yeah, we've been waiting. Me and my neighbour have basically had the same landlord and same letting agency. We made the phone call to our letting agent on Friday evening, and I waited in all day yesterday, and I didn't get a phone call saying that you were coming or not coming. And I've got work tomorrow at 4 a.m. So I need to know what time you are planning to come, because I've got a leak in my kitchen that may be going into downstairs. Right. Okay. Right. Yeah, now it's fine. Yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you very much. Bitten by a dog. Well, bollocks. Apologies about that. I've got a plumber coming over, an emergency plumber, because there's a leak in my flat and the flat below. So we've got a plumber coming over. But I think the dog fight with Michael Vick, that was about a decade ago. You've had the Roethlisberger allegations. You've had the Minnesota Vikings party videos that were leaked and all that. There's been various players assaulting people. firearms offences, drugs offences. There are issues with the NFL. They have a code of conduct in place. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to really deter the misbehaviour of high-profile players. The player welfare issue is another thing, which has been an ongoing issue now for Inflategate. That the Patriots, Inflategate, and Spygate are, they're not prim and proper, but they're nowhere near as bad as the actual misbehaviour of team owners and players doing basically involved in criminal activity. The Michael Vick scandal, I think, was possibly the worst. However, there have been other allegations against individual players and groups of players over the last 10, 20 years that, if that were you or me, we are facing some serious legal charges. I think the NFL being one of the biggest sports in North America, the amount of money in the NFL, there are issues with the NFL. There are issues with Major League Baseball as well. The NHL has got problems. My favourite sport, my favourite league, has got issues. There are issues in all these sports. They're not immune from problems. The NBA had the referee involved in the match-fixing betting scandal. So there are issues with North American sport. And now they've completely decriminalised gambling on sports across the whole of the US. Does that raise the question of match fixing and spot fixing in these sports? And we've heard allegations of players placing bets on games and all sorts. So it is interesting to see what's going to happen with regards to the NFL, all the scandal, the NHL, with now that Vegas has got a team in the NHL, and the deregulation of the gambling laws, the liberalization of gambling laws across the US. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Major League Baseball obviously had the steroid era, the juicing of the ball era, the steroid scandals. NBA's had the betting scandals as well, and allegedly match fixing scandals and bits and pieces like that. So just because the sports in North America doesn't mean it's free from scandal. You look here in Europe with all the match fixing allegations against European football leagues and teams, and then you look at F1 and how people are going. There are issues with sport. Cricket has massive problems with gambling and betting and a whole variety of things. On what else I was going to discuss, because I've got this plumber going, the live stream is going to be a little bit shorter than I anticipated. And of course, the last live stream attempt that we had was just a farce. The laws involving sports gambling have changed in the US and gambling in general. And that's interesting. Spurs losing to Chelsea with Mourinho in charge of Spurs when he was in charge of Chelsea. That's an interesting subplot to the whole thing. I was very, very surprised that Mourinho stayed as long as he did at Man United, considering he was still living in London. I'm not surprised he took over Spurs. I'm not, because he lives in that part of London. Doesn't surprise me. But I think Spurs have, shot their bolt. I think a lot of their players have come back to earth. I think some of their players really overperformed for a couple of seasons, and they've come back to earth. And I think that the amount of money they put into that stadium, partly to get the NFL games, they haven't invested in the squad. They're now investing now. They're trying to play catch up, where other teams in the league have constantly been drip feeding new players in, moving players around, keeping the squad fresh. Spurs, for 18 months, didn't sign a single new player. And when they say, but we've signed Harry Kane, we've signed Dele Alli, we've signed Alderweireld, all these contract extensions. Great. You haven't signed a new player. You've just kept existing players who are injury prone on big contracts. This is where I think Spurs will not win a trophy in that new stadium for a long time. They're going to do an Arsenal. They're going to have to spend so long paying off that stadium. That was already late being finished, late opening, over budget. I don't know. And it doesn't matter that a player gets sent off, because some teams actually can play better with 10 men. That some teams have that mentality of, we are going to be a brick wall. You're not going to pass us. But Spurs this season, and to a certain extent last season, in fact, when Leicester won the Premier League, Spurs were neck and neck, and then they blew it. And since then, I think they've been the nearly men. They've not quite taken their next step. And I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But I do have some concerns about teams like Spurs not achieving their potential. I think they've come up short. I think they've played a lot of their players have played a lot of football. and they haven't, because they haven't added to that squad until this season. For 18 months, they added not a single new player to that squad. Injuries have started to become a problem. Exhaustion, fatigue is starting to become a problem. And when players like Dele Alli are saying, "I think I've peaked," and players like Danny Rose are demanding pay increases when they actually haven't got any silverware, that says to me that this team might have shot their bolt and they might need to have a little clear out and some new players come in. The stadium, was it actually necessary, or was it a money grab with the NFL? I'm going for a money grab with the NFL because I can't see Spurs winning a trophy anytime soon. Not with how they're playing and not with where they are in the league. Even with Mourinho as manager, I think it's going to be a tough order unless they have a good cup run in the FA Cup and they get some silverware out the FA Cup. I don't know. I really don't know, but I think they have shot their bolt. Convincingly outplayed in the Champions League final against Liverpool. And even that was a poor final. I honestly don't know where they go from here. I think they have peaked. I think they need to, even though they've added players to that squad, they haven't added enough. Chelsea, I think Lampard's doing a good job. He's doing a very good job with Chelsea in his second managerial job. He's doing a very, very good job. So we'll see what happens with Lampard and how long he stays at Chelsea, but he's actually doing a lot better than a lot of people expected. He had a very good run at Derby as well. I think that's kept him nice and grounded. He knows the club really well. He knows some of the players at the club because he used to play with them. Good relationship with the owner, good relationship with the chairman, and he's doing rather well. I think Chelsea could be a dark horse for a few bits and pieces, but I think I've got to go now because the plumber's here. So thank you very much for this brief little live stream. Thank you very much. I'll have some more videos for you very, very, very soon. Hello? Yeah.